Okay, happy Friday. We're at the end of the second week of our Daniel Bible reading plan. We only have one more week to go. There are only 5 chapters left after today. They're the harder chapters, but this is kind of chapter 7, what you're reading today, acts as like a transition chapter to kind of get you into the dreams and visions section of the book. No longer is it about a king who's having visions. Now we're going to see different visions that Daniel himself is having. And the cool thing about chapter 7 is it actually, 2 verses in particular, mark the center of the book. And if you've watched some of the previous Bible studies, if you're reading the email, you know that the center is actually where in Hebrew literature you want to draw your attention. It's called a chiasm. It's parallel ideas that are set up throughout the book to mirror each other, and it all drives toward whatever's in the center of that chiasm. Well, we've talked previously about the chiasm of the first half of Daniel. There's a chiasm in the second half of Daniel, but then there's also this huge chiasm that actually makes up the whole book, and the center of that is here in chapter 7. So here's what comes right before it, and then again right after it. It's Daniel. He sees this vision of these 4 great beasts: bears, leopards, and then one like had great iron teeth, devouring, breaking into pieces, stamping what was left of its feet. He says this beast is different than the ones who came before, the one he describes just before in this dream in chapter 7. It has these 10 horns. It's just a really strange vision. And what without going into like the details of what do these beasts represent and what does this mean about the end of the world? Okay, set all of that aside for just a second, and we're gonna take the 50,000 foot view. All of these beasts, what the author is doing, what this vision is about, is all of these kings and these kingdoms, these violent dictatorship-like kings and beasts, these things that devour everything in their path. They trample everything in their path. Do you think this is a vision that God's people in exile might have identified with? Probably, right? They're in a foreign kingdom, they're being trampled, they're being stepped on, they're being asked to compromise their beliefs. And when this book was actually being read, probably a couple hundred years before Jesus, they would have been in a similar situation then. The Romans had taken control. People were still getting tramped on, and we too probably identify with this today. I don't know how much you feel like you're getting trampled on, or that there's this great beast looming over you with iron teeth ready to devour you. The point is, every generation of readers who read Daniel see in their culture, in their world, beasts around them. These beasts don't have to be kings or kingdoms. They can take shape in all manner of ways. I think if you spent a few minutes thinking about what this looks like for you, you could probably come up with some pretty awful beasts that if you were to describe them, this language would feel familiar to you. I know I can think of that for me, these beasts that seem to rule our world. And that's kind of the picture that we get here in 7. And even later into 8 and 9, it's God's people are in suffering. There are these beasts that seem to just trample over them. So what are they to do? Where is the hope in this story? Where is the hope for the people who are in exile? Where is the hope for God's people who are being ruled by these foreign kingdoms or in cultures that feel like they're suffocating and being trampled on? Where is the hope? And that takes us to the center of the book. It's chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. And if you've already read this for today, I'm sure you know exactly what we're about to read. But if you haven't, it's so beautiful and so special. Okay, I'm going to read the whole thing and then we'll talk about it. This is Daniel speaking. He said, "I saw in the night visions, and behold, within the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and language should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." All through Daniel, we've read about these kingdoms and kings, one after another, who either are destroyed, like Nebuchadnezzar, who's brought low, he's humbled before being finally restored back, or these kingdoms in the visions where, remember the one little rock that comes and destroys the big statue in one of the first visions of Daniel. But then we get this that talks about the Ancient of Days, which is a way of describing God. One like a son of man who comes before the Ancient of Days, and to him is given glory and dominion and a kingdom that will be described as one including all peoples, all languages, all nations who serve him. And this king, he's going to have dominion that lasts forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. Do you see how much hope that would offer these people? Even though right now it feels like you are in the darkest of circumstances, one day there is going to come one who is worthy of standing before God, before the Ancient of Days. And not only is he worthy of being in God's presence like that, he's worthy of being given a kingdom that lasts forever. One that isn't just about the Israelites, but it's one that serves all people. Because that was God's original plan, was not just for the Israelites. They were meant to be the vehicle through which God blessed all the nations. And here in Daniel, we see another iteration of that vision and how God's saying it's going to come true. It's coming, it's coming. And I think this is like the thread of hope. It would be the thread of hope for people who were awaiting for this promise. There have been other places in the Old Testament where something like this had been described, but they would have wondered if that was still the case, even in exile. Was God still with them? Was he still going to bring the promised snake crusher of Genesis 3? Was he still going to follow through on his promises to bless the nations? And this vision in Daniel, it's like a lifeline saying, oh yeah, God's not done yet. God's going to set up an eternal kingdom that will never be destroyed. And it's going to be made up of this beautiful diversity of all peoples, all nations, all language, and they're all going to serve him. Of course, we know what's to come in just a few books in the New Testament. They wouldn't have known about Jesus. This would have just been that lifeline. Can you imagine having to trust? We get to look back and say, oh yeah, this is Jesus. Like this is coming true. It's here. It's happening now. And there's still a piece that's not happened yet. We get that benefit to look at this and trust and know who this is talking about. But for the people in Daniel's day, when this was written and originally read, they would have just had to continue trusting God that this would be true. What would that look like for you? I mean, I think in some ways, we still have to trust. We have the benefit of knowing that Jesus fulfills this prophecy, that he's come, that his kingdom is one that's already on this earth, that's going to rule forever. But yet, in some ways, Jesus is still yet to come. He's still going to come and be the one who destroys evil at its source once and for all. He's still going to come and set up his kingdom on earth. That hasn't happened fully yet. In seminary, we call this the now and not yet. There's a piece of it here now, but there's a piece of it here that's not yet here. Coming up in Advent, the last 2 days in the study that we're going to do, our Advent devotional, we'll read those chapters of Revelation, the last 2 chapters where it talks about the day that's coming when evil is ultimately destroyed, when everything is made right. But like Daniel's readers, do you trust that that day is coming? It looks different for us than it did for them. Not in every way, but in some ways. Do you trust Jesus will eventually come back? And I think just like his readers, that gives us hope. It's a lifeline that we can hold on to when even in our world where it looks dark, where it looks like there are these beasts running wild, ready to trample us with iron teeth and bears and leopards and all of these intense, violent images. Do you trust that God is still the one who's in control, that his kingdom is the only one that's going to rule forever? I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you back on Monday as we start chapter 8.